my credo became what I do best is what I do least. And that got really frustrating, because what I
Yeah.
fashioned myself from my other experiences was finding talent, identifying talent, finding it and signing it, developing and making the record, and then developing it for the marketplace. And with all the other corporate responsibility and, like I said, in daddy daycare that came with it,
Yeah.
and I was doing that the least.
Let me do an intro. Folks, today I have a long-time friend, over 50 years, crazy. He is from a family of musicians. I went to school with him in the middle of nowhere in Salzburg, Pennsylvania at Kiski School. And his father, Billy Eckstine, unbelievable talent. And then Eddie became president of Mercury Records. I am so pleased to have him on today. So, Eddie, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Brad. Good to see you again. It's been a long time.
Oh, it has been a long time. When we were at Kiski, it's like, how can we escape? And and then after we're gone like 10 years, it's like, man, I wish I would have embraced that more,
Yeah.
you know. Luckily, I just saw a picture of you and Mike Tomlin from the Steelers and Mel Blount from the Steelers. So you still have a great connection with the people in Pittsburgh.
I do. Well, my dad was from Pittsburgh. He was born and raised there. And that's how I ended up at Kiski. But to your point, I go back about once a year because I'm still very dear friends with Tim Lewis, who I believe was in your class, right? I was class of 71. Timmy was 72. You also? You 72?
No, 74.
Ah, so you're like my brother was 75, yeah.
Guy.
Yes, so I try to get back there about once a year. I'm a West Coast guy, California, LA to be exact. And Timmy and I have a running bit. I go to Steeler games with him, but I'm never going to go when it gets cold. I said, so if I'm going
Yeah.
again, it's going to be before November. You're not going to see me sitting out in the stadium when it's snowing or 8 degrees. Hell no.
I remember Kiski used to take us to games. And I remember sitting in the bathroom. It was the only place that was heated. I didn't even see the game. I was like trying to warm myself in the bathroom.
Yeah, man. But yeah, actually, Pittsburgh, I hold Pittsburgh near and dear to me because one of my brothers still lives there. My third brother was on the Pittsburgh Fire Department, retired from the fire department after 40 years.
Oh,
He lives there, and I see Tim. I go up to Kiski usually when I'm there, at least for a day or two here and there. We went and watched a football game and met the new head of school because, yeah, as you know, Kiski's co-ed now. It's a lot. A lot has changed up there. But the physical map of the school still looks pretty much the same. Although there's a couple new buildings. Clark Hall doesn't exist anymore, and a couple
oh,
other things are
okay.
new. Yeah, and I know you had him on the show recently, Mr. Reno DiOrio, Mr.
Oh,
DiOrio, as I call him, as you do too. He keeps saying, "Call me Reno," and I'm like, "Nah, nah, 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 nah."
isn't it tough?
Yeah, it is absolutely. I just go through the same thing with Mr. Pigeons. No, call me Jack. I don't think so. How about Bird, which is what we always called you anyway. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's respect. I think that's where we at Kiski we learn boundaries,
hmm
and I think that's what a lot of us have lost. Now, after I left college, well, even in college, I went to University of Maryland to run.
hmm
I didn't go to study; I just went to run.
hmm
But I didn't have Mr. DiOrio and Mr. Pigeon in my ear
hmm
that I could talk to, and I floundered and I really went off the rails.
hmm
Fortunately, I worked my way back.
hmm
Now, I just watched your dad on the Ed Sullivan show, Billy Eckstine,
hmm
unbelievable musician.
Thank you.
and you grew up under that influence.
Mhm.
Now, at Kiski, we didn't know who your dad was. We just knew you and Guy. But to grow up under that influence, was there a pressure to succeed in something?
Something, certainly, not necessarily the entertainment business. It's funny you say you didn't know who he was. What I always say is that your parents knew, because my dad was of your parents' generation in terms of, if I had a dime for either for every grown up that grew up in the 40s and 50s who said, "Oh, I love your dad," blah 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 blah, and their kids had no idea who he was. It was different generationally. I would say to folks, I say, what Marvin Gaye, for the sake of conversation, what Marvin Gaye was, say, to our generation, Billy Eckstine was to theirs. Um,
Wow.
and when you say the pressure, nah, but theoretically, based on sort of real life experience, I was, in my parents' mind, I was supposed to be Thurgood Marshall or Barack Obama, not a guy in the music business. Last thing they wanted to see me in was freaking music business. But they couldn't keep it away from me because I loved music and I loved the whole environment and everything that went with it. And the best example I use is that in our family, entertainment was the family business. So if you're from a family that was in the teaching business or the plumbing business,
Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
dinner table, teaching and plumbing stuff was discussed. In
Yeah.
our business, in our household, show business was
Yeah.
discussed. And to sort of take it out even further, because Dad's business was such that he was out of town a lot. He was on the road, and my dad was on the road anywhere from 250 to 300 nights a year.
Oh,
Um, and as a result, uh, one of the things that he would do, my mom and dad would do during the summers, when dad had a schedule of certain gigs he did up in the Catskill Mountains at the Jewish resorts in the summers, for like a month to 6 weeks, and then there'd be a series of gigs over in the Poconos, for like the Italian and sort of non-Jewish resorts up there, and then a series of shows at what they call the Chitlin Circuit, quote unquote Chitlin Circuit, which are largely black theaters like the Apollo Theater in Harlem or the Regal Theater in Chicago. We would go on the road with Pops, during the summers, and we had, my brothers and I had gigs that we would do for the production.
really?
Yeah, and it sort of started with your first teaching responsibility, and also from Dad's standpoint, it was to demystify the music business, demystify what he did, because people tend to respond to things, so-called celebrities and things that are in lights. Pops, my dad's, my best friend growing up, his father owned a business that made window shades, and the guy who lived across the street from us was in the garbage business, very successful garbage business, metals and stuff like that. But one thing Pops used to say is, I wish I could do what they do, but only thing I know how to do is what I do. And the fact that it carries me out of town in order to do it, but I'm a working stiff like they are, it's just, my work puts me on television and puts my name in lights. And part of the demystification business was to show us how it worked. So when we would do those gigs in the summer, the first job that I had was being responsible for putting the music on the stands for the orchestra. And if you put the third trombone player's part in the saxophone section, you're going to have a problem when the show starts. And my dad's piano player is a man named Bobby Tucker, which, by the way, just to digress a second, is what ties in the connection when you said the picture of Mike Tomlin. Mike
Oh,
Tomlin's wife is my dad Bobby Tucker's granddaughter.
get out.
So that's the connection there. And
Oh,
Tuck was the uncle that we never had on my dad's side, because my dad had two sisters, and Tuck had two gigs in his career. He was with Billie Holiday for 5 years, and with Billy Eckstine for 50 years. And Dad and Tuck were like brothers, and Tuck was like our uncle. So yeah. So like I said, so if you put the music on the wrong stand, you'd hear it from Tuck. He's how that that kind of stuff. So you learn the responsibility of doing stuff right in detail. And then the second gig that we'd have, like the next year, my dad never wore the same thing in the same city twice when he was on stage. So for the sake of conversation, he'd come off stage, have a tuxedo or whatever suit he was wearing on. He would leave it in the middle of the floor in the dressing room. He picked it up, put it in the valet bag, and gave it to the valet, either the hotel's valet or and they would get us the cleaners and stuff would get clean. And then year three, there was, you put on your little suit, you were greeters, because a lot of those gigs that he did in those times, once he would come off stage, he'd come out like 15, 20 minutes later and sign autographs and meet people and that kind of stuff. So, as a little kid, people were sort of hovering around the backstage area or whatever. Oh, my dad will be out in about 10 minutes to sign autographs. And you hear people, oh my God, that's his kid, that stuff. And so you really sort of learned the importance of the relationship of the fans to the family. That we learned that the fans were the lifeblood of our system
Yes.
that gave us the life that we're able to
Yeah.
live. So
Yes.
it's cool.
You can't fake humility.
Mm-hmm.
Can't fake being kind to somebody. Either
Mm-hmm.
you are or you aren't.
Right. Exactly.
So after you left Kiski,
Mm-hmm.
what was life like?
I went to Boston University for a year, flamed out because what I found was a lot of what I had learned at Kiski, they're trying to teach me freshman year in college, and I already sort of been there and done that.
Yep.
You remember Joey Liska? Joey
Yeah.
was my room. Joey was my roommate senior at Kiski and also
Yeah.
freshman year at BU, and we're still very good pals. And I got to Boston, and girls, which we didn't have at Kiski, uh, a lot of music and a music community, which was great. I was well into that, and smoking weed and hanging out and partying. So I had other priorities other than going to school.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
amazingly enough, when my grades came in, my parents weren't exactly excited about whatever 2 B's, 4 D's, and an incomplete. So, but that was really where I got my first sort of interest and involvement in the music business, was back in the Boston area, because Boston was and still is a very hearty music town because
Really?
there's so many college students up there. There's a bazillion college students in Boston, and it's a very important city for the music business and for artists, concert business, etc. And so I was going to a lot of shows and seeing a lot of bands, and that's really where I sort of was able to sort of cultivate my interest in the music business, or music period. And then like I said, after I flamed out for freshman year, and my parents decided they weren't going to send me back there, I came here and went to USC. Here being Los Angeles, came to USC, University of Southern California, Trojans baby. Did that for a semester, and then I started doing some things in the music business. I had a very dear friend that I'd grown up with, who he and I we both had similar aspirations, and we had a pact amongst each other: whoever got a shot first in the music business would pull the other along. And my buddy David did, and ultimately pulled me along too. And
Oh,
interestingly enough, it was writing for a music publication, and David was the writer, and I was the guy who hung out with him a lot. But the dirty little secret was David was not a great writer. And from the Kiski experience, we were trained to be good writers, because of Pigeon. So I would write all
oh,
day. I was ghosting all of David's stories for him. And he would turn the stories in under his byline, but I was the guy who was writing them. And what it was enabling me was an opportunity to have access to the business as a whole and the people that he was getting to know, behind the scenes in the music business. And at one point, he took a job working for one of the major labels. And when he went into his editor to tell the editor that he was moving on to this other situation, they were like, "Oh no, David, we don't want you to leave. You're too good. We really love your writing." He said, "Well, you love my writing? Meet the guy who's been writing it." And stepping out of the shadows is your boy Ed. And Lady
so he remembered and was loyal.
he remembered he was loyal. And the woman who was the editor went, what? So go cover the show for me on Saturday night and bring me back a 300-word review. And I did. She apparently liked it, and and then I was off and running.
Wow.
Because it's Here I Come, and my parents were not duly impressed because they really wanted to see me finish school and stay in school. But what I wanted to learn
Oh,
was not being taught in school at the time.
I
So
think Kiski was our college.
it was absolutely.
I, college was kind of an after fact, and I just lost my way.
Mm-hmm.
I, we were so groomed in a good way at Kiski, disciplined and everything else, that after that, it's like, am I doing this again?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like being bored.
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
And I don't think you do either.
Nope. I'm not good at board.
No. So tell me how you became president of Mercury Records.
Well, it was a bit of a circuitous path. Circuitous Kiski word number 328. You'll know what that
Ha!
means. um, how I ended up there was like I said, started as a writer, and the path began when I was writing for a particular magazine in Los Angeles, a place called magazine called Phonograph Record Magazine, and I received a call one day from the publicity department at A&M Records. And Quincy Jones was an artist on A&M at the time, and he had just completed an album of his which was transitional for him called Body Heat. And I'd known Quincy since I was a kid because he had conducted for my dad. My dad was a key influence on him because when Quincy was a 14-year-old kid living in Seattle, Dad came through with his band, and Quincy showed up backstage. When the band was unloading for sound check or whatever, Quincy shows up backstage with a bunch of music under his arm, and waiting for the musicians to come off the bus. Hey man, let me carry your trumpet in. By carrying the trumpet in, the security guards would think he was a member of the band. So
Ha!
he did that, and then he had his music with him because he afforded him the opportunity to get in front of like Bobby, the piano player I mentioned, or Dizzy Gillespie or whomever, and show them the charts that he had written because he was like a young sort of savant genius kid, and he would hang out until the middle of the night after they'd finished their shows to show him his music. And Dad said that they always wondered, they're like, when's this kid ever go to school? Because he's here hanging out with us, hanging out with grown ass men. So couple that with they called and said, would you be interested in doing this interview about this record that he's just done? I said, yeah, let me hear it. They sent it to me and I loved it. And they arranged for me to gave me his number, and I called Quincy on the phone. And when I called him, he hadn't talked to me in years. Last time he had seen me was on one of those tours that I was talking about in the summer with Pops, because Quincy was conducting that on that tour. And so he said, hey man, how you been? Where you been? I told him all about, I've been to high school, boarding school, Kiski. School, no, girls, man, you must have lost your mind. I said, I did. and told him how I'd gone to school in Boston, as did he, because he'd gone to Berklee School of Music. So we shared that, and he said, man, I said, I like the record a lot. He said, oh, I said, want to do this interview? He said, yeah, sure. So Disneyland at that time, I know this is a long story, but I'll get there. Disneyland at the time in the summers used to do big band gigs on the Tomorrowland stage at Disneyland. Ellington, Basie, Quincy Jones Orchestra at the time.
Oh,
So
interesting.
he told me to meet him at this particular place on the A&M studio lot, and we'd ride down on the band bus together to the gig. So we did, and we got to the gig and just hung out backstage and shot the shit. Never really did get into the interview. Talked about everything else. He and the band played their 2 sets. Went home. Never did didn't get the interview that night. He told me, hey man, come by my house the next day. Came by his house the next day. Ironically, the house that was about three houses away from the house of OJ's house on Rockingham, if you
Oh,
remember the OJ situation. So I went by the house and sat out in his studio in the backyard for about 12 hours, shot the shit, did this, rinse and repeat, never did do the interview. Told me to come back the next day, which was Sunday. We did it again, no interview. But I realized after it was all said and done, what things that he was telling me was that the music was not the only transitional thing that was going on in his life. He was getting ready to make changes in his support staff and in his professional career. And he was looking to start a production company and go younger and more aggressive. And since I was both young and aggressive at that time, he asked me, was I interested in coming to work with him or for him? And at that time, I was, making, as I like to say, 8 cents a printed line in a publication I was writing for. So if the line was that big or that big, I got 8 cents. And let's just say many stories that the line was that big. So I realized I wasn't going to get out of mom and dad's house at 8 cents a line. And I was also pumping gas at the local gas station.
oh,
I'm not going to make any money here. So he said, you want to come to work with me? I thought for about a millisecond. Yeah, sure. And I was in his office. He said, be in my office at 10 o'clock Monday morning. I was in the office 10 o'clock Monday morning and left 12 years later. And
oh,
I started off as sort of, doing whatever, and left as his de facto partner, and more or less president of the label. I think by title, executive vice president, general manager. But as I like to say, we started, it was he and I and a secretary. And when I left, it was he and I and about 12 secretaries and, a few 75 million Michael Jackson albums, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of trial by fire and just getting thrown in the middle of the game. I learned a lot. Probably should have been fired a few times along the way, but because he and I had a special relationship, that was family in a lot of ways. I didn't, and I survived it. And he said, when you screw up, he said, accept the fact you screwed up, realize what it is you did wrong, and don't do it again. Well, that period, I was with him from 1973 to 1984, and then I got an offer from Clive Davis to go to work for Clive as a vice president of A&R at Arista Records during the period of time when they were launching Whitney Houston and doing Aretha Franklin's album Freeway of Love, Kenny G's first record, Kenny G's successful record, Dionne Warwick's That's What Friends Are For. A few other things were happening when I was there. I worked there then, and then got I wanted to get out of there because I respect Clive tremendously, and the environment was great. It was kind of like going to an Ivy League school, but I certainly had illusions of grandeur that and aspirations to excel beyond being, the guy who was helping to find songs for acts that Clive was doing. I wanted to have the freedom to do my thing. And a dear friend of mine at the time, who I'd known from LA, was working for PolyGram Records as head of West Coast A&R. And we ran into each other at a convention. He was like, "How you doing, man?" I said, "Dude, get me out of here. I hate it here. Get me out of here." I was living in New York at the time. I love New York. I said, "But I hate where I'm working right now. Get me out of here." He says, "So I think I might be able to help you." So he put me with his boss, who was in the process of making some moves. And they made those moves and put me in front of his boss, the head of the company, and sat down with him, and we had a tremendous conversation. And he made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse. And they created the PolyGram at the time was looking to broaden their creative reach in America because it was a European-based company, based company run out of London with headquarters in New York and Nashville and a satellite office in LA. And they wanted to have a stronger reach on the West Coast. So they created this West Coast based label and asked me to run it. And I did. And the first couple signings I had were Vanessa Williams, who we did very well with, a band out of Oakland called Tony, 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 that we also did very well with, and a singer called Brian McKnight that we did well with.
Wow.
Then the winds of change, corporate change blew through, and the new guy who came in to run the place basically carpet bombed the upper reaches of corporate structure inside of PolyGram US and structured it such that I was the last man standing. And in doing so, appointed Mercury Records was the crown jewel of the PolyGram group of labels at that time, and I was offered the gig to run Mercury.
Wow.
So I became the president of Mercury Records, which our co-president initially, with a guy called Mike.
For how long?
Well, I was there with a president title for 8 years. Bone and I were co-president for year and a half.
Now, was that a high stress 24/7, 365 job?
You bet, brother. I always said that I love the gig, but I hate the job. 2 days a month, it was the greatest place on earth because 2 days a month I got paid. But the part that got frustrating for me was there was a little bit of daddy daycare that kind of felt like at times where there's can't we all get along? There's just a lot of people coming in. Oh, Brad won't do this. Brad won't do that. You're like, dude, just go do your gig. Brad will be just fine. And it occasionally got frustrating. And for me, my credo became what I do best is what I do least, and that got really frustrating. Because I fashioned myself from my other experiences was finding talent, identifying talent, finding it and signing it, developing and making the record, and then developing it for the marketplace. And with all the other corporate responsibility and, like I said, in daddy daycare that came with it, and I was doing that the least.
And that takes away all your creative
Mojo.
abilities of what you want to do. Most CEOs I talk to, say that I have so many issues with employees that I don't have time to run the company.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's how do you get over that? What would you say to a new CEO coming out to, I mean, you got to have better managers under you to take care of that.
Absolutely. You got to make sure you got a really strong team around you. I had a very good team around me, but there are probably some people that when I walked in the door, I maybe should have replaced immediately. Uh,
Mm,
Recognize what your strengths are and don't try to do the things that aren't in your strong suit. Make sure you got, if you're a football
boy,
coach, you make sure you got really strong assistant coaches around you. And I had
isn't
some
that
great
the
assistant
truth?
coaches
Yes.
around me, but not necessarily great ones. It was it was a great opportunity, served me well in a lot of ways, but ultimately not fulfilling.
Yeah. So, who's been the biggest influence in your life?
Biggest influence in my life, well, aside from my parents, um, I mean,
That's huge to say
certainly my
that.
mom and dad, um, for a variety of reasons, some good, some bad. Um, but professionally, certainly Quincy Jones and a man called Dick Asher. Dick Asher was the guy who initially hired me at PolyGram. Dick was a somewhat grizzled New York lawyer slash music executive who, when I first sat with him for the job that I said became the thing that tried to broaden their West Coast creative base, he was the people he was talking to at the time were other sort of older guys who were peers of his or guys who had worked for him in other capacities who were not necessarily creative people that he was trying to bring in, that he was thinking about bringing in. And his creative head for PolyGram at the time was a guy more of my generation, was trying to convince him to go younger, and that somebody like that's why he put me in front of him to be interviewed, a guy called Dick Wingate. And when I sat with Dick, we were talking for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. And he leans across the table and he has a voice kind of like this. He leans across the table and says, "You know what, kid?" So he says, "You could be the first." And I was like, "Okay, whatever that means." And I looked at him like, "What do you mean?" He says, "You could be Jackie Robinson in the music business." And I was like, "Oh, I said, really?" I said, "Yeah." So that's cool. I said, "I'm just a knucklehead trying to sign some acts and sell some records and make some money and get on with my life here. But if you feel that way, God bless it. And ultimately, that notion is what or his energy is what allowed me to have the autonomy to do things my way when I was in that environment. So
Jack
Dick was,
Pigeon said that to me one night outside the library, and it motivated me to, it was like a booster rocket
mm-hmm,
leaving and getting into orbit.
mm-hmm,
Um, he had said something to me that inspired me, gave confidence in me. Reno and I were kind of the same, that my dad died at 13, his dad died at 11. So I loved the discipline. I loved the boundaries. I loved everything about Well, not everything about Kiski. I always wanted to leave. Um, and then when you get out, you're like, man, I just wish I would have appreciated it more. And it sounds like you are now able to appreciate it more.
I do. It's going through it. The notion of being 3,000 miles from home, from my family and my friends, was sucked. Plain and simply, it sucked. But and the I needed the regimen and the discipline of school because I was screwing up out here. I tell the story that when I was in junior high, as we called it then, middle school, I guess they call it now. The boys' vice principal at the school that I went to then, called Portola Junior High, called my parents in one day and said, "We'd like to talk to you about Eddie." And then they went and talked to him. And they said, "The good news is Eddie's a smart kid. The bad news is he knows it." And and during that period of time, the school allocated 3 periods for lunch for different students. And my two best friends at that point in my life were twins. So I had fourth period lunch one of the twins had third period lunch, and the other twin had fifth period lunch. So let's just say periods 3, 4, and 5, you could not find us in any classes. We would cut and go somewhere. Take off and go hang out and do whatever we were doing. And I was cutting school a lot, but I was still pulling grades. Because the schoolwork was easy to me, especially like English and history and stuff like that. It was all simple. And I was, I was good enough at cheating or doing what I had to do to make sure that science and math were taken care of. So anyway, I needed that regimen, and Kiski brought that regimen. I tell the story that you remember Mr. Fabian, of course. Mr.
Yes.
Fabian was my freshman English teacher.
Yeah.
And he peeped me as being full of shit from day one.
Really?
It was amazing how he figured that one. I didn't realize I was that obvious.
He had that Porsche.
He had this. He said to me he said something at one point and asked me, and I tried to dance around and bullshit the answer. And as you know, the teachers all lived on campus, so at night during study hall, we had the ability to go to their apartments to get extra help.
Yeah.
So Fabian says to me at one point, he says, "Look, I'm just telling you something, kid." So what he said, if you're not in my apartment tonight to talk to me about what we're going to be dealing with tomorrow, just know that you're the first person I'm going to call on. And and then he'd call on you, and if you danced and tried to bullshit your way through it and got it wrong, he would dock you. And we had that demerit system, for freedom from campus. So yeah, Fabian was a key component.
Wow.
At that point too. And Reno, same thing. I saw Reno when I was in Pittsburgh this past week. We had brunch on Sunday, and he and his son David and I, and it was great. Timmy and his wife and I. And I was telling David, Reno's son, said, "Tell me some stories about my dad during that period of time." And I said, "Oh man, I'd love to." Told him a story about when I was pitching on the baseball team. There was a point where I guess the first 4 batters in an inning, I walked them all on 4 pitches, so 16 balls in a row. And Reno walks out to the mound and says to me, he says, "Hey Ed," I said, "What?" "Yeah, Mr. Orion." He said, "You know the object of this game is to throw strikes, right?" He said, "Throw some freaking strikes."
He didn't come out to yell. He said that.
Yeah, so that ended up having, in a weird way, having an interesting influence on me, which was to know what the object is, and as the leader to be able to communicate that, and then also when somebody's not doing that, that you don't have to go down their throat. Just do it in a way, beat them over the head with a feather, as opposed to, "Hey, you idiot, throw that."
Boy, is that a great analogy. Goodness gracious. I told Reno on the podcast that without Reno, DiOrio, and Jack Pigeon, I'd be dead right now. I had severe depression, been going through it for years, but there were times I thought about taking my life, and I didn't think about because my dad was gone. I didn't think about my brother or my mom. I thought about what it would do to Reno and Jack. So that's the influence that they had on me. What are you doing today? I mean, in your life right now?
I'm retired from as I said, I'm retired from active duty in the music business. I still do a little dabbling here and there because I occasionally get those, as I call them, Godfather phone calls of, I keep trying to get out, yet they keep trying to pull me back in. I do bits and pieces, like phone calls. Hey Eddie. When I hear Eddie, I know what's coming next. I got an idea, and I always say, if there's a check that comes with that idea, I'm listening. Otherwise, keep it to yourself. And doing bits and pieces. I'm working on a memoir book.
Oh, cool.
My so-called memoirs, which is to be called A Life in the Day as opposed to A Day in the Life.
Boy, profound.
And the Kiski chapter is going to be called Salzburg 15681. So we know you and I know what that is. So I'm doing that, and I have a couple of documentary projects that I'm working on. One about my dad, and then another about a couple of artists, that I'm working on with some friends, and bits and pieces here and there, just helping where I can. And I'm no longer this school right here, Los Encinos, K-6 elementary school in Encino, California, where I'm from. My daughter went to school where I was on the board of trustees for a year, 2 years. So I do bits of that, and just dawdling around the house. I'm Mr. Honeydews, honeydew this, honeydew that, and just watching my Dodgers, who are on their way to the World Series. I hope if we win Game 4 tonight.
When you were pumping gas, your dad is very successful. You're pumping gas. Did you ever feel that that was beneath you, or did you feel you were on the way to what you wanted to do?
I was 18 years old, and it was a job that was, allowing me to get from point A to point B. Uh, I never thought of it as I didn't put it in any perspective like that at all. It was just always this is my gig. There's a gas station I'd been going to. My parents always went to when we were kids. So the guy who owned the place, I knew him, Mr. Bergen, and he just when I was looking for a summer job, yeah, sure, come on, brought me down there, and I was one of the knucklehead 18-year-old kids who was pumping gas. One of the other guys who was there quickly taught me the ropes of how to make a few extra bucks here and there. Little things like if somebody's reflectors were broken on their tail light, pull out the light bulb and say to them, hey, you're missing your rear right light bulb, Mr. Henry. Oh, really? Can you replace that for me, Eddie? Yeah. How much is? Oh, about $1. Okay, sure. Take the bulb out, put it back in, take the $1. And stuff like you need an oil change. You check the oil, and if whatever you pour whatever they needed, and always leave like a little like this much in the can. And so, after about maybe 3 or 4 oil changes, you had enough accumulator where you could pour the remainder in, take the money that way. So there was always a hustle. But
So, besides the hustle, what would you say to somebody starting out? Because I believe now that college is a waste of time unless you can be a doctor or attorney, nurse, whatever requires that. I was an airline pilot for Delta for many years. It would be better. The college is now what, 50, 60,000 a year, so that's what, 240. You
mm-hmm,
can get a commercial license to fly airplanes
mm-hmm,
for about $100,000 going to flight training. And then you work your way up by flight instructing, blah, blah, blah. But they're making 550 an hour now and having half the month off. So why not put your money into a trade that you're going to do? I think college needs to reinvent itself. When we went on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Howard Johnson's was all over the place.
mm-hmm.
Now they're no more. They
Right.
did not adapt. If you could give anybody in a few sentences how to be successful, what would you say?
Identify your passion, uh,
Ah, yes.
focus on it, be true to it, and figure out how to apply it in your life. Avail yourself of people who share that passion as either mentors or people that you can grow in the business with, and learn from them. And if it's something that you can benefit from schooling, do the schooling. You're just saying about college. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with. It's a little bit of both. My daughter, by comparison, has her master's in English from Stanford. She's a teacher, and master's in education from
Mm.
Stanford. She's a teacher, and she just published her first novel this year via Random House. If she hadn't
Oh,
had that education, she wouldn't have done either of those two things. So,
correct.
um, but in that case, just schooling was important. But as I was saying earlier, for what I wanted to do with my life at that point, school wasn't available to me for that. I'm a mentor for the Thornton School of Music at USC, one of the most highly regarded college music programs in the world.
Oh,
Uh, and I'm working with a lot of young students there who have, it's just our kids who want to carve a path in the music business, either on the executive side or the creative side, not necessarily as musicians, but, I'm there to mentor some of the kids who want to, follow a similar path as I. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. Just identify it and know what it is and jump in wholeheartedly, and don't let anybody knock you away from that
ah,
dream, but be smart enough to realize when, yeah, I know I thought I wanted to do this, but maybe I'm not suited for this. Um, my son, or our son, is is a very talented young musician, and when he graduated from high school out here, he was National Honor Society, really smart kid. And he went to the place called the New School in New York to as a music major. And I don't know if he was suited for that there then, because one of the things in my mind, I felt he was kind of denying himself the intellectual capacity that he developed while in school in other areas outside of music. And I've explained to him there's a number of guys that I know pretty well in my business who are either lawyers, accountants, or whatever, who are incredible musicians, but have gone another path in terms of their day-to-day existence. They have vocation and avocation. Their vocation by day is they're a lawyer or they're an accountant or whatever. Their avocation by night or on their free time is they play in bands. There was a guy who was the controller at my son's high school. By day, he was a controller. By night, he put on a wig and sat in rock star clothes, and he was a drummer in a Deep Purple cover band. Also, here in LA, there's a group of lawyers that have a band they call Buffalo Springsteen, which is a band of lawyers playing rock music. They're a rock band, and they play a number of those benefits and stuff here in town. All really talented players, and some of them represent some of the biggest stars in the business. But they're talented players. So what your initial goal and dream is, sometimes it's going to get diverted, and sometimes if you take the diversion, it's okay to have another dream, but pursue it wholeheartedly.
Everybody listening, Ed said something that is perfect. You got to live and work your passion.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that, you never feel like you're working a day in your life.
This is true.
You could be paid $1 billion a year, but if you put me in a cubicle, I'd say, "What's the highest floor?" and I'd jump off.
Where the windows open.
I want to do what I'm gifted to do, and I want to put everything into that. Forget about the money. Money will come at certain times, but if you aren't doing what you love to do, your life is going to be miserable.
Very true. Absolutely. I love music. My whole life, and I love artists, and I love being with the artists, and I love working with artists. And they can make you nuts. Quincy used to have a line that that he would say sometimes out of frustration. He said, "This would be a great business if it weren't for the artists." So, and I'd always say, "It is a great business because of the artists," And kid, shut up, So.
That's a great story with him. Well, Ed, I appreciate you being on today, sharing everything about your life and experiences, and you're a good friend.
My pleasure,
a good
man.
brother and a Kiski boy.
Absolutely. There you go.
All right. Thank you for being on.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
See you, Ed.
Take care now. Bye.
Thank you for listening today. Quite a segment. Please subscribe to our channel so you get all the latest updates and you can see all the past great stories of people who have overcome. I'm Brad Henry. Thank you for tuning in.